Okay, folks, we're going to get started here at 6 o'clock. And so my name is Eric Miller. I'm with the North Central Ohio Land Conservancy. We thank you folks for coming to attend this forum. I'll lay out the format of the forum for you. I'm going to be moderating it today. And we're going to have two speakers, and they're each going to present our position. It's a position against you'll hear our position with respect to the Division of Forestry plan. So we'll be making two presentations. That will take about the first 20 minutes. And then I'm going to open the floor to questions. And I want to say this about questions. Questions and comments. I want to start by favoring folks who are here to say something in favor of the forestry plan, in the sense that I ask those who are pro-forestry to launch their comments or their questions first. I will say this, though, so that we can have an informed discussion, I'm going to reserve the right to stop someone when they've made one point. If you've made one point, I'll be stopping you there, so that someone from the panel can respond if they disagree. And then we'll go back to the person who made that comment, and they'll have a chance to refute our panelist. And then if need be, we'll go back to the panel again. So as I moderate this, if you're here to make a point, you'll get your chance. If you want to make several points at a time, running from one to the next, I'm going to be stopping you. My position is moderator, so we can discuss one topic at a time. So that's going to be the format for this forum here. And with that, I'll just introduce our panelists. And I'm going to start with Annette here first, Annette McCormick. So she'll be presenting, and then Dr. Randi Pokladnik will be speaking. Also, when someone has a question or comment, I may well repeat it in case I think they haven't spoken loud enough to be heard. Likewise, if someone in the audience can't hear something, I want you to signal me like this or raise your hand, and I will be repeating or getting the person speaking to repeat louder in order to make sure that the folks who are here can hear what's being said. So with that, we're going to get started, and we'll begin with Annette.
Well, the first photograph up here is an area that is
Stand up and speak up.
So I kind of wanted to show this slide first in that it's very representational of the white pines they plan on cutting in this very first year of coming back to commercial logging. So as you can see, they're really nice size. They're probably 80 to 90 years old. They're very healthy. Very few invasives in the area. And it's not representational, which they usually have in the press of real tight together pine trees with not much growing on the ground. As you can see, there's plenty of light, and that's what they want to take first. That would be approximately 40 football fields this first coming year of trees like that. So I kind of wanted to just use this slide to show what could be in the future. But before I want to go into some historical parts about white pines that we can I kind of want to talk about a little bit about the Forestry Advisory Council and some of the things that the Division of Forestry has been saying in the press. And they have an independent forestry expert saying removing the pine trees will allow for regeneration of trees better suited to Mohican soil. And then they say this would be David Hicks, who's on the Forestry Advisory Council. We've been given a handout of the 8 members of that advisory council. If you kind of look down and see their credentials, you can see that they have really tight affiliations with forestry, wood products, pulp and And David Hicks made a statement in the press that the pine grow poorly in the former agricultural fields, with possibilities of stress, slow growth rates, decay, and breakage. And Bob Boyles, who's the chief of forestry, he's claiming it's going to take 30 to 50 years to revert back to hardwoods. And sometimes he's mentioned that they're going to take all the pines out, and other times he said that they plan on leaving 3 to 5%. That's what the Division of Wildlife wants to do. But in general, they pretty much want to get rid of the pines in the forest. And I'd say it was Mohican's most iconic tree. So, we can show the next one here. So historically, I was just really surprised to find some of this, is that this goes back to 1909. This is a good 17 years before there was even a thought that someday there was going to be Mohican Forest or Mohican State Forest or a park. It didn't even have a name yet. They called it the Mohican Valley. And that came from a small, a little village called Mohican Village. It was 3 miles south of Loudonville. It was an Indian village. But the area that they describe in this is the Mohican Gorge and the watershed of the Mohican River and Clear Fork. And Edmund Sechrist of Sechrist Arboretum fame, he came in and did this reconnaissance survey. And he said that this area is prime importance. And the term, he said that this valley contains the largest area of white pines in the state. It occurs in a mixture with hardwoods and hemlocks and occasional pure stands. That the soil conditions were exceptionally favorable. And he said, in view of reforestation, it is a pleasing fact that white pine encroachment indicates its preponderance in this section, and no better native tree can be found for purpose. This not only yields lumber of the highest quality, but is a fast-growing species and one adapted to check erosion. So then, a little bit later than this, after the park is what was called Mohican Forest Park in the 20s, there was a tree publication of just Ohio trees. And under white pine, the author said, most abundantly near the headwaters of Mohican River in southern Ashland County. That's in the whole state. That Mohican was notorious for its white pine. And he said, the tree commonly attains heights of 75 to 100 feet and diameters of 2 to 3 feet, though much larger specimens are still to be found. Then you go a little bit later than that in the 30s, 1936, with the Ohio Journal of Science, their assistant forester said that this state forest contains the largest area of native white pines remaining in Ohio. So, next slide here. So this was from the OARDC research, which for decades they had research in Mohican, but in the 90s the state pulled their funding and all that research was basically just thrown out. But you could just see here in Ohio, or here in Mohican, you know, the astonishing growth of white pines. And yet, this is what Division of Forestry is trying to eliminate from the forest now. So, yeah. So, I'm just going to quickly go through some stuff about the clear cut. Some of you might have seen the other, or been on the tour, or went to the other forum. But this was in 1994, and I found literally thousands of the biggest, best, nice hardwoods along the main trails in Mohican ready to be cut. And a lot of chaos pursued after that. Bills in the House and the Senate in order to ban commercial logging in Mohican. One thing after another, 10 years of, you know, extensive press and whatnot. But eventually the Division of Forestry decided, along with the governor and, you know, all the head brass, that they would ban commercial logging here. And this sale got stopped back then. So they decided they were going to do educational logging at Mohican. And their very, very first cut after, you know, a lot of years of not, was this area that they claimed was just a worn out old pasture and, you know, degraded fields from, you know, pioneer times. So the next slide. So we went in there and took photographs of the trees that they had cut, obviously not all of them, but as you can see by that stump, these trees were here when, you know, panthers and, you know, wolves were still in Ohio. You know, these trees were still here before the first pioneers even came here. So that was a small walnut of 175 years. Division of Forestry said that the average age in that whole cut was 111 years, but there were so many trees that were, you know, 150 to 200 years old that, you know, they're obviously counting smaller ones in there to get that average. So, that tree was so big they could only put one on a logging truck. And go ahead. They just, because they were supposed to do it non-commercially, they had to hire someone to cut or cut themselves. And they just, somehow by bringing those trees and piling them on a parking lot and selling them to the highest bidder, that became a wood product instead of a commercial cut. And go ahead. So just, you know, month after month, they just hauled them out of that area. And the state, they sold this wood just for that clear cut alone for $57,844. That might seem like a lot. And for a long time, I've thought that their expenses were $65,000 plus. But having re-reviewed my notes, I found that it was $94,214. That's what it costs the taxpayers for them to do their very first educational cut. Now that included their education. So that was part of their education. Put a sign on that wildlife tree. And this was like what happens after a clear cut, and now there's precipitation access. You know, like before, those nasty old trees would keep the rain from hitting the ground or something. So this was a sign. This is now 13 years later, and that sign used to sit with a big, you know, view of the hillside, which was basically just all the tops of the trees that was left because they basically cut everything. And all that dark area, when you look into the forest a little bit, that is a solid invasive bushes and shrubs. That's bush honeysuckle, there's autumn olive. I mean, the list is, it's just unbelievable. And they claim now, like, well, we're going to take care of that. To try to penetrate that thick growth and think that any baby trees would come up through that, it's you're going to have a lot of trouble to do that. And so just in finishing here, it's like, I'd say that clear cut is a good representation of them basically systematically destroying our hardwoods here, our trees. And now they want to be in lockstep with all the other state forests. Well, we've had different designation all this for the last 20 years. And they just are basically dismissing Mohican's main claim to fame, which are white pine. So,
Yeah, I'm gonna walk around because I can't sit down and talk. Okay, this is probably, before I even start this slide, let me just make this perfectly clear to you all in the audience. These trees belong to us. These are Ohio State Forest. They don't belong to anybody else but us. And this is what makes this so alarming to me as a resident of the state for 62 years, that there's very little left, and we'll get into that in a second. This is the big thing if you want to put a monetary value of real money on how much comes into the county as far as tourism dollars. And if these forests get marred and scarred from whether it's selective logging or clear-cut logging, will people come from out of state or across the state to see, stumps and the last photo that Annette showed with all the invasive species taking over? Will somebody want to go backpacking or hiking or biking or bird watching in that kind of a spot? I don't think so. As versus something like this, which the older, parks and mature trees, resemble this a lot. Yeah, this just shows you what we've lost. Initially, when the settlers first arrived, this is clear back in 1620, we were completely forested. And then, as the decades and centuries went on, and now we're here pretty much, no forest in the state of Ohio, at least not virgin forest, all second and tertiary growth. Of all the acres that we have in the state, this is how many are held in public forest, 0.7%. Not even 1%, less than 1%. So on the entire state, and we have pockets, right now there's in my neck of the woods, I live in Harrison County, but if I just go south in Belmont County, Dysart Woods, which is being, overseen by Ohio University, and their environmental science department, and they have tried, countless times to stop this long wall and coal mining underneath the forest. But it's gone through, they got the okay. And then recently, the Wayne National Forest, which is also down in the southeast quadrant of the state, they're opening those areas down there to oil and gas leasing. So even, we're being, assaulted on all levels with, fossil fuel industry and then the timbering. And I'm going to show you a map which shows you just how, precious the Mohican Forest is. It sits almost smack dab in the center of the state. And you can see, except for this little, area up close to the lake, most of our forest and public forest are down here along the southeastern and a little bit up here in the northeastern. These are pretty small areas up in here, but these are the big areas. And then Wayne National Forest is kind of, like a patchwork quilt down in this area. But Mohican sits up here, and it's about 2 hours from anywhere in the state. If you did a Google MapQuest, you can get there, from either side or north and south. So it's accessible to most people that live in the state. It's not, a 5-hour drive, which makes it really nice. This is how, if you put the 5-year plan that's being proposed now up against the Ad-Hoc plan that was written in 1998, as far as, what I can see as a non-timber forest person, it's a management versus stewarding. And if you look up the verb manage in the encyclopedia, it says to control. Stewarding, a synonym for that is to conserve. So we're looking at, controlling Mother Nature versus, stewarding Mother Nature, letting, nature take its course. If you look at, the timber versus ecosystem, whenever a lot of people in forestry departments see a tree, they see wood. When I go into the forest, I sometimes don't even notice the trees because there's so many other things going on underneath of the canopy that it's hard to notice the trees because you're just in awe of the wildflowers, the fungi, the bees, the butterflies, even, the forest soil is, if you scoop a handful up and look at that, it's alive. It's a living, breathing system that when you start hacking off the arms and the legs, it's not going to survive. It'll never be the same. And their goal is short term. So we're going to take out 20, 40 acres, and then next year 20, 40 acres. And eventually, it's just going to be a patchwork quilt of logging everywhere. It's unsustainable versus sustainable. If we let it go, we protect it forever, then your grandkids can go and see it, my grandkids can go and see it, their kids can go and see it. It's always going to be there. It's always going to be ours, and we can protect it, in perpetuity. Just some things about forest succession. They talk about, the trees, the hardwood trees are going to come back in there. Well, I don't believe that the hardwood trees will ever come back in there for a lot of reasons. But when you go into a forest and do any kind of timbering, once you get in there with that heavy machinery, now you're crushing the roots, the tubers, you're pretty much destroying the perennial seed banks. You're going to do some damage to trees that you bump into when you get in there with heavy machinery. And all of these, this is a picture of ginseng, all of these medicinal plants that could find homes in mature forests like we have in Mohican, they will not survive. I know I dealt a lot with ginseng when I was doing my dissertation, and they need heavy canopy cover. As soon as you open up the canopy, they will not survive. They do not like a lot of sunlight. They are a deep shade plant. A lot of these other ones, and you can see the roots on a ginseng, those will get crushed into heavy machinery. There's golden seal, that they call it yellow root, the old timers do. That's used for medicine still to this day. And then black cohosh is one of the #1 plants used for menopause in European countries. So these are all valuable plants. There's another, if you wanted to put a price tag on it, an economic reason to keep these forests intact. And then you have the other species that use these forests. We have warblers, lots and lots of warbler species. Neotropic migrants come up and, summer vacation in those forests and build their nests and raise their broods. And once you start, logging or even selective logging in there, no one can say for sure what the impact's going to be to those species that use those pine trees and some of the other areas of the forest to nest in. And we have butterflies, we have fungi, people have mushroom hunting clubs that go up and hunt mushrooms in the spring and in the autumn. And then I was just kind of Googling other interesting factoids about the Mohican, and I found this one about a student that on a field trip with his school found a fossil, which is a pretty rare fossil of a marine animal. So who knows what else may lurk up there in the forest floor. Okay, other more scientific reasons to keep intact forests and not go in there and log is that forests do help sequester methane gas. They've already done some studies, and this is just one, where if you go in and you start, running heavy machinery and compacting the soil, if you actually release methane gas, which is one of the worst gases for climate change. It's much, much worse than carbon dioxide. The forests act like carbon sinks, and they've proven, and they've done some scientific studies recently, that old trees, contrary to what they thought years ago, do sequester more carbon than young trees. They always thought, a young tree grows fast, it's going to take more, but that's not the case. So all of those trees that are in there right now, they're holding carbon dioxide or carbon inside of their trunks and branches. Well, we talked a little bit about fungi, but this is another thing that people often don't even realize. There is a huge system of mycorrhizal fungi in the forest that connects all the roots of the trees and the plants together, and it's kind of like a symbiosis. And this also helps keep the carbon sequestered in the forest soil. And the very reason that they planted, or so they say, these white pine, because they are such a good tree for erosion. So the soil doesn't run off when we have a quick rain. But they do so much more than that. It's you really can't put a price tag. And can we ever have the hardwood forest back? Probably not. I think that's kind of a Pollyanna approach to things. We have so many invasives. I mean, anybody here that has a forested area, you even have a tree knocked out, and my husband and I have 4 acres, but we have a couple places where the canopy was opened up because a tree fell over, and instantly the invasive species are in that opening. And then another thing that's happening now, and a lot more studies are coming out and saying that the climate in Ohio is changing. We've already got one one USDA growing zone warmer than we did 50 years ago. We're supposed to get less rain in that area where the Mohican Forest is. That area is going to be less rain, and the east side of the state is going to be more rain. White pine are more suited to less rain, not so much oak and hickory. And then anyone who lives close to the woods knows this is a huge issue. If you don't have a gate around your forest, they're going to come in there and eat your little tiny saplings. And I'll end out with a quote before I lose my voice. Everybody needs beauty, places to play and pray, where nature may heal and cheer and give strength to the body and soul alike. I did my dissertation on non-timber products so that I could be in the woods, because I love to be in the woods ever since I was a little kid, and I got a chance to, several years ago, I ran through the Mohican Forest when I was training, and I was in awe, because there aren't those kinds of forests down in Harrison County, unfortunately. Dysart Woods is the closest one that we can get into. So you guys that live up here in this neck of the woods, you're lucky that you have that to get away from life and get some peace for your soul.
Thank you very much. Okay, so at this point, and just for anyone who came in late, we're going to take questions or comments. I want to start by favoring those who have comments or questions pro forestry, but each person, I'm going to limit you to one question or comment at a time so the topic can be discussed in a back and forth way. So anyone who has a point to make in support of the forestry plan, I'm going to give preference to that. Okay. Well, then I'll just say, anyone have a question of our panelists? Start with that.
Were forestry representatives invited to attend?
Yes, we acted through Tom Brennan. Tom Brennan was the editor of the Mansfield News Journal for many years, and Tom is, hardcore for fair and objective reporting, presenting both sides and all of that. So we solicited him to be a moderator for panels, so that. And he made many calls and sent emails trying to get the Division of Forestry to attend a forum like this so that we could have a give and take debate. They have declined to do that. They have
So
declined.
specifically for this evening's meeting?
Well, we started soliciting them for a forum in Mansfield. We began soliciting them to do that in the first week of September, and continuously got no answer. And finally, we went ahead and did one in Mansfield without them. And then subsequent to that, we did hear from them that they wouldn't be attending a forum for an actual debate. So, having gone through that process for Mansfield and then having heard that they're not going to be attending a forum, I didn't specifically solicit them for this one. But certainly, they would have been welcome, and chose not to. Okay, go ahead.
Randi and Annette, your presentations were effective, touching. Randi, you almost got me choking there for a second. Picked up this on the table as I came in, prominently listed down here on the bottom. Governor John Kasich and Ohio Senate President Larry Oakhoff. Have you guys made any efforts to approach those guys, the guys who are running the state of Ohio, with the passion that you presented here tonight, this message? They need to hear this.
We have approached them. I think Representative Kick, who I thought was supposed to be here tonight, I don't see him.
This morning, he said he would be here.
I've invited Representative Romanchuk, who claimed he was coming and had 4 constituents and all the information that we have here. But at the last minute, he couldn't find the shrine on his GPS, so he couldn't come. And we have definitely talked to them and sent them information. I really hope Senator Ad-Hoc would have been able to make it tonight, but he declined.
Yeah, they've all been repeatedly invited.
Yeah, many of us have contacted them. We've called their offices, we've sent them letters. We've gotten return letters from Senator Ossoff. Mark Romanchuk met with some of us this morning. So we're participating in the democratic process and trying to vote as much support as we can get from the legislature and from the governor's office. Does that answer your question, Jim?
Kind of. Those are the people that you gotta handle this.
Well, these petitions are here, we're asking people to keep it up, and even if they go forward with this plan, which is, you know, very likely that they will, we're going to keep up the outcry to try and stop it. And so it's going to be an ongoing battle, whether we win this round or not. You saw the area with white pines. I'm going to stop there and go back to trying to moderate here. So another question go ahead.
Well, I read an article in the Richmond Source this morning that talked about the forestry's rationale for what they're doing. And there was somebody named Jeff Herrick from the Lower Great Lakes Young Forest Initiative for Wildlife. And he says that the plan will create more biodiversity. White pines block out sunlight. They need to be thinned. That we're not seeing wildlife in the lower story because the white pines that were planted block out the sun and it keeps things from growing underneath so that the animals don't have, seeds to eat and things like that. So that was one of their arguments.
Okay, now.
And they also
now,
said that there
wait,
wasn't
let
going
me
to
do
be.
this, just like I announced. Now, there was a point.
Mhm.
So her point, for those of you who didn't hear it, was she's saying that advocates are saying that white pines suppress wildlife compared to what they're gonna put in.
Mhm.
Okay, so go ahead. Which one of you want to respond to that point? Would you like to, Randy?
No, well, anytime you have a mature forest, if you go in, and I can take you in and show you, there's things like spice bush, ginseng, turkeys eat the seeds on that. There's all kinds of bushes native to the area that grow berries. I've never seen a mature forest not have quail and pheasants and rabbits and deer. I don't know how he can justify that. And it's just funny because it's like Mother Nature and this state back in 1620 has been living under forested canopies for hundreds of years. And all the animals have done just fine. So why would we, in our ultimate wisdom, think that we have to go in there and take out some trees here and there and clear cut so that we can regenerate and get some of these species back? Now, that would do the opposite. And, in my opinion, once you go in there and start doing that, you're crushing the seed banks, you're crushing, well, everybody knows like Jack in the Pulpit and Trillium, they're all bulb plants. And once you crush those, they don't come back. And these all make seeds. And those provide habitat for insects and small, game animals.
Well, what he is saying, and not necessarily it's Jeff Herrick, but what they were saying in the article from the Forestry Division was that the white pines had been planted during the 30s and 40s to replace native trees that had been cut down by farmers, to clear the land. That they were creating a white pine plantation, and that when you have those kinds of plantings, that limits biodiversity.
Not really. I mean, there's, what Annette pointed out, this has been a big area for white pine, in previous times. And I think they tried to use that, plantation or monoculture to denigrate the white pines. And, lots of medicinal plants actually prefer to grow underneath of a white pine because the soil is slightly acidic. And a lot of things like bloodroot and ginseng would rather be in a slightly acidic soil than be, underneath of another type of tree, like a hardwood.
Are they correct in saying that 1,800 acres of white pine were planted on cleared farmland to improve the soil during the 30s and 40s? Are they correct in saying that?
Kind of in defense of forestry, some people get mad at me when I meet someone in defense of them. There are some areas, the areas that they like to show off, there are some areas that have red pine, non-native red pine, they're very close together. If they were so hell-bent on trying to get a hardwood forest, then why don't they just take those non-native, they could do that instead of beautiful, fully mature, not fully mature, teenage white pines that still could grow for hundreds of more years. They do have some of those areas that I would say could definitely use some work. And it's something they should have done, decades and decades ago. They used to have the host plant, and they had a way to use these small pines. They would go in and thin, and then they had a source. But they had this creosote plant. They could soak it in the creosote and then use those small diameter. They had a multitude of uses for those. But then they closed that creosote plant because it was so toxic. In fact, where it is became a Superfund site. But later, now it's the mountain bike trailhead site. They really did no remediation on it, but that's what it is now. But they didn't do those thinnings over all those decades like they could have done. But there definitely are areas, and maybe if they worked on some of that, there wouldn't be such an outcry now. Instead of picking the biggest, the nicest white pines here, that they could. I feel white pines are so iconic to Mohican and we're historically in the entire state. Why don't they turn Mohican into showcasing white pines? They would have tourists come from all over just to experience how lovely it is to be in an area with big pines. So
Now I want to see if someone else has a question or comment. Yeah. And I saw him, so go ahead.
Is it correct that there are no forestry people or no ODNR people here tonight?
I wouldn't know.
Okay, so
There-
no one raised their hand, so there are none here then. Is that a correct assumption?
I didn't ask that ODNR, if there's an ODNR employee here, I'm not going to demand that he or she identify himself. That would be their option. So
Okay.
I truly don't know if there's an ODNR employee here or not.
Well, I'm just going from the earlier question about that. It seems to me if the choir's here, it's one kind of session. If there's somebody that you can try and convince or talk to or persuade, it takes a different kind of twist in the meeting.
Well, we've tried repeatedly to get them there by getting an objective person committed to fairness to hold an even-handed debate. We couldn't do that, but now we're inviting anyone here who wants to learn more about this, and our objective will be to educate those who are here as best we can.
I understand. Thank you.
Okay. Sir, comment?
With all due respect, I disagree with the doctor reference your stance on wildlife in closed canopy forest ecosystems and referring to this woman up here that, do you disagree that early successional stage habitat is the second rarest habitat component only to wetlands and that
Okay, wetlands and forest, we're talking two different habitats.
No, I said early successional stage forest is the second rarest habitat type only to wetlands. I would like to see where in a closed canopy situation you show me quail or pheasants, and we don't even have ruffed grouse in the forest that we had when I grew up because of a distinct lack of early successional stage habitat due to a monoculture of pine and an overgrowth of certain species in some areas.
Okay, I would say this, if you want to try and experiment with early stage succession, then find a cornfield or a meadow. To me, it makes no sense to go into a mature forest that has a viable, vibrant ecosystem and start thinning out trees to say you're going to start early stage succession. And then in 15 years, you've got to start it all over again, because that's just what early stage succession is. It's not a new forest. If it's 15, 20 years beyond that point, now you're back into, succession keeps going on. Mother Nature keeps, carrying through, and that's not going to be early stage succession. So to get that kind of growth, you're going to have to repeatedly go in there every 15 and 20 years and cut everything down and start all over again.
That's called management, ma'am.
Well, management is called control, and that's not what I think this forest needs. I think this forest needs to be stewarded.
Well,
That's my
are we
opinion.
allowed to comment
You're
back and
entitled to
forth,
yours.
or what?
Okay, so, now go ahead. Go ahead and.
Well, I believe everybody's entitled to their opinion, and I respect anybody else's opinion, but I would like the rest of the group, for what it's worth, to realize there are other opinions out there. They're based on scientific management, scientific fact, the scientific method, and I believe if you are taking on modern progressive forest management and pretty much painting it with the same brush as bad forestry practices of the past. I mean, forested land in Ohio has increased over time. It hasn't decreased overall. And the very fact that we live in stick homes as opposed to mud huts or adobe dwellings, I think it speaks to the fact that forest management has worked in the past and in the present.
Well, I'm not denigrating forest management. Forest management is completely different than taking a mature forest and protecting it forever for the residents of this state. You're talking about two different things. I live in a log cabin. My trees were harvested from a forest fire in British Columbia because I didn't want to cut down living trees that size. So I know wood is not, I'm not denigrating the forestry industry. I'm just saying that for this particular instance, I don't see what purpose it would serve to take this ecosystem and start, selectively or clear-cut logging in it when there's so many other available spots that if you want to bring back quail, we have quail and pheasant in our area in Harrison County, so if you want to see some, come down to Harrison County. They wander across the street all the time. But if you want to do that, then find some other ecosystem to do that in, or a meadow, or a field, or a farmland. There's thousands of those kinds of acres around the state. But it's like saying, this is a beautiful home, and we want to start a new home, so we're going to go and knock down this home so we can start this new home.
Well, that's your opinion, ma'am. You're
That's
entitled
right,
to
that's
it.
my opinion. But that's how I see it, and I'm not a forester, I'm an ecologist.
Well, we agree to disagree.
I think one thing that everybody seems to agree on is that the invasive species are bad for the forest and elsewhere in my own yard, for example. What kind of protection from invasive species is this new forestry plan offering? Because thanks to that tour we went on, I saw that the cuts from 2004 are just loaded, and does not seem to be any plan to address that. So what kind of, if we all agree invasive species are bad, and we do understand, and the forest manager admitted, yep, we have an invasive species problem, why is the division not focusing on fighting the invasives instead of cutting down new areas? Do you have any, has anybody responded to that?
Okay, well, one of you needs to answer, and answer loud enough that everyone can hear you.
They've really not done anything about invasives at this forest, although they have claimed that they're trying to work on some other forests, but it is just so outrageously out of control now. And the only way that they can be dealt with is really heavy use of herbicides. They do not respond to just being cut. If you just cut them, they go, oh my gosh, I'm going to send out 1,000 more. They don't respond. And personally, I was probably the most anti-herbicide person you could ever meet. And now I might miss herbicide because I have realized that tree of heaven and autumn olive and bush honeysuckle, if you just cut them, they just explode, sending out roots and runners to multiply. And so, very careful application of insanely expensive herbicide has to be dabbed very carefully on the cut stem, and then for years you have to keep following up with that. And they're never gonna have the manpower to do that or the finances to do that. So, I don't know what's gonna happen about that, because if you just drive through right now, where most of the leaves have started to fall, and you look at something that's really, really bright green right now with red berries or dark blue berries or dark black berries, it is an invasive species that's wanting to colonize all of Mohican right now. It's driving around through all the different roads, through the forest, and you can see them. They're everywhere. Tree of heaven, all those gas line openings, all those power line cuts, it's just solid.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
They did,
But I'm gonna, someone in the far corner, go ahead, sir, and speak up.
Just curious, I think I heard the date, what, 1995 was either a cutting or proposed cutting, and then 2004, was that another date when there was a cutting or proposed cutting? I've got like two questions. One is, did they do anything as far as planting? I heard a concept I've never heard before, this first succession. Did they do anything as far as planting trees to bring about what he was talking about, number one? And number two, are they talking about doing any kind of planting this time around to bring about what he was talking about? Or is it simply that they go and they cut and they leave?
They go and they cut and they leave. There has been some planting of experimental American chestnut, some of them bred with Chinese chestnut. Most of those have not been successful. Even just recently, they planted 15, 16 chestnut at the gorge overlook. Half of them in a year have been lost. And they even put protective shields around all of them to keep the deer from browsing. But what happened is rodents got inside and ate them. So it's just so difficult. You'd have to protect every single tree you plant from deer browse or from rodents or something. So in '94, that logging got stopped. It never went through. And on the clear cut in 2004, just even like 5 or 6 months later, they were getting stump sprout regeneration from some of the oaks and whatnot. But so quickly, all those invasives came in, it's just choked all that out. And in the old days, you could do a cut like that, and you would get regeneration. But that's before we had so many invasives around here now.
Go ahead.
So, if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like this idea of succession is a nice idea, but it's not clear that it's going to work. It's not clear that it's going to happen, and therefore, what is clear is that you're going to get invasives. And apparently, it's really expensive and time-consuming, and therefore not very likely that we are going to do battle with the invasives. So the succession idea is nice, but they could have done it, but apparently it didn't work. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, yeah, if I may, what you saw, you mentioned two dates. The clear cut they showed that then was overrun with invasives. That was a clear cut in the year 2004, and that was overrun with invasives. That's the one good example of what you could expect. Okay, is that fair?
Yeah, the article that she mentioned in Richland Source, and is also the main article, front page of the Ashland Times-Gazette today, they do have a photograph of pines that had been thinned a long, long time ago, and it does have some, there are young hardwoods under some of those pines. Not so much oak regeneration like they would have ever thought, but there are other hardwoods on the ones they did a long time ago before they have so many invasives now. So you can see that in article from yesterday.
Okay, so we'll go with the question here, sir.
It's not really a question, just a comment, offering benefit of my own experience. Reforestation is really near impossible with deer browsing.
Say that.
With deer browsing, reforestation really is near impossible. I've done it. And you do have to protect every single seedling or they will get hit and they won't go anywhere. It won't grow.
Sir, and in the back, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, do either of you ladies know, or anybody as far as that goes, how many acres of timber, you know, forests there are in Ohio that will be ready for timbering today, tomorrow? How many acres?
On forest, on Division of Forestry, on our
Well,
land?
whatever, the National Forest, Mohican, and all the trees in Ohio, how many acres are there that are ready to
It's vast.
plant?
It's really big.
Okay.
I don't know the exact
Yeah.
figures though.
Well, I don't either, I'm just, probably, you'd have to get a pamphlet somewhere, but I just got
I'll
back.
respond to that.
Okay.
The statistic we've seen is, on an average basis over the last several years, 97% of the timber products produced and sold in Ohio are taken from private land.
Right.
So
all right,
one
yeah.
of the points of our groups has been, why is the state of Ohio even competing with the private timber industry? Why are they even doing it when Ohio has a small percentage of public lands compared to most states? Why not take what's left and make it into bioreserves and husband it as old growth? Go ahead.
I got kind of a two-part.
Okay,
I just got back from Michigan, and I spent a month up there in the month of October, and I guide at a hunting camp up there. And what I guide for, people that come in to hunt grouse. Guys come, they want to get their dogs out, get them on grouse. And the first thing those guys will say to me, I want to go to a 15 to 20 year clear cut, where you got growth of aspen that are 15 to 20 years old, and that is a belief that that's where the grouse are going to be. Okay, I'll take them there. They're in there about a half hour, and they come out, and they said, I can't even walk in there. You can't point a gun because the aspens are so thick. If you did see a grouse, true, there are grouse in there, and true, they're there to feed, and they're there to protect themselves from the hawks, because it's so thick, the hawks can't get to them, and they do feed on the catkins, but there's not going to be grouse or aspen growing in Mohican Forest when they clear cut this, like it is in Michigan. There's over 4 million acres of timberable forest up there. And I'll take these guys out where I feel they might have a chance to get some. And the grouse are where you find them. I've found them in forests that were like, look like pine plantings down in Georgia. Just open ground that jack pines are coming up in. They're spaced anywhere from 40 to 50 feet apart. And they're protected under the brackets, the ferns, the grouse are. So I've heard that argument about Mohican and grouse since the late 70s. And yeah, they used to be down there, but there's a lot of other factors that play into it other than regenerating forests. And I've, like I say, they are where you find them.
okay, thank you. Another comment or question? Go ahead, back again.
Well, we said that the DNR apparently wasn't attending tonight, but that one lady over there did have the newspaper article, which was sort of the DNR. I was wondering if she had any more information from the article that she could share to us that our panelists could then respond to.
There was one more thing that I was going to say, that the article did say, and this was from, I think, Sanders.
Chad Sanders.
Yeah, I had, Sanders says new plan calls for small-scale periodic thinning, not large areas of clear cut. So is that not
Yeah,
accurate?
they don't plan on doing clear cuts of these pines.
Mm-hmm.
But in the picture I had that showed the great big ones, all the bigger trees are pines. And so since they want to do a crown story removal, or whatever you call it, canopy removal, that's plucking out every one of those big pines. And it's not a clear cut, but just taking their equipment in, you know, the young hardwoods that are this big, you have to roll over those to get to those pines. And the other ones they want to do is like third row removal of pines. Like say but not this year, that's in the future. Where you would take some of these plantations where they are close together and take out like every third row. And that's where, you know, they have had some success, I'd say, of having the smaller hardwoods come up after that's been done. And, you know, they would maybe, you know, if they could keep ahead of it, get somewhere on that. But they don't plan on clear cuts at this point right now.
Okay, so that is accurate, that they weren't just going to do selected trees.
Go ahead.
What does the 5-year plan mean? In one of the articles, it said that they're going to take 20 to 40 acres out per year, and there's 1,800 acres that they're going to take out. So if it's 20 to 40 acres per year, that seems like it's going to take a long time to take 1,800 acres out, but there's a 5-year plan. So what's the 5-year plan?
It's hard to say. Back in when the Ad-Hoc met for 3 years and gave them recommendations and they agreed back then, it was going to be a large core of mature forest. They weren't old growth yet, but it would become that way, you know, in 100 years or 200 years. But at least they were going to protect a large core. Well, then they came out and said, well, that was just a 5-year plan. We don't make a plan, you don't make a plan is to grow trees for hundreds of years and then turn around and say, well, that's obsolete, that was just a 5-year plan. It doesn't work that way. So this new 5-year plan, I don't know. Because those guys are in and out. I mean, they're not here in 5 years. You know, for them to say, well, this is going to take us 30 to 50 years to have this happen, they're long gone, you know, and somebody new comes in. But we're all here, and our, you know, your children will be here, and their grandchildren will be here. They're the ones that get the, you know, the benefits of it not being manipulated so much.
But it's not 5 years to take out 1,800 acres.
That 1,800 is, they did say 30 to 50 years to have that happen.
Okay.
To take all the pines out.
Does that feel like that answers your question? Okay, I'm going to go the gentleman in back and then we'll go to this end. Go ahead.
I think I have the wrong information or something. I thought it was just thinning of pure white pine stands, not thinning of white pines out of a variety of things.
I didn't understand that.
I thought
Rephrase your question.
I thought the plan was to thin out white pines in pure white pine stands.
Monocultures.
Right, that's the plan, or are they planning to cut white pines out of everything? Because there's plenty of places where there's white pine and all other kinds of trees too. Are they planning on picking every white pine out, or just cutting areas where there are only white pines? That's what I thought, the second piece, where they were going to cut only where there are pure white pines. That was my impression. Is that false?
That's false. No.
Well, they only want to cut pine down, not just white pine. This next, in fiscal year 2017, 2018, it's white pine only. They're not talking about the red plantations or the white pines that are real close together.
Here's what I'm wondering though. Are they cutting the white pines where it is just a stand of white pine and nothing else? Or are they going into the forest where there is a variety of species, picking out the white pines and taking those?
You saw the
Why don't,
main
could
slide.
someone bring up that first
Yeah.
slide?
The main
That's what we're trying to do. Yeah,
On a just presentation?
we'll bring that.
And what's the justification for doing that?
Because they feel if they take out the biggest trees in there are the white pines. And they have a crown spread up top that they think is shading those potential hardwoods that are underneath. So if they pluck those out, of course, they're not gonna pluck them out. If they could pluck them out, that would be a little better.
So there's hardwoods around them.
There's tons of hardwoods around there.
Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's like in normal woods.
Yeah.
That's why we're so excited about it.
Okay.
Thank you.
So why then is it written, in things you read about it, articles you read about it, it's written as in they're just going in and thinning stands that were, let's say, planted in all white pine.
And that's what they're.
These used to be in a row. In the 30s and the 40s, when they were planted by the 3Cs, they were in a row, every 7 feet. There was a row. But they thinned them for little poles way back. They thinned them again. They thinned them again in the 90s. You can't ever see that there were rows now.
Okay.
But that's what they want to take out first. Instead of the row, you know, they could be doing the road thing, but they're not. They're taking the biggest, best, nice ones.
And we did hear on one of the tours that the reason they want these they'd be taken out by the Amish, the work would be done by the Amish for log cabins, so there's a market for them, and they're close to the road.
So the public's building people's log cabins.
Okay. One other thing, and one of the speakers alluded to that, how things change over time in terms of the Division of Forestry concept. And we have something that the Division of Forestry itself published in the 1970s about using herbicide in the pine plantation to spray hardwoods that were competing with the pines. So that was the concept, and I just met with Bob Boyles today, and along with a representative, and I reviewed that, and they didn't deny that. In fact, Bob Boyles said, well, yeah, that was before me, that was before my time, and indeed it was. It was before his time. But that's another problem then that Randy's alluding to, is when you're in this concept of active human management, you have things like suppressing the hardwoods to protect the pines, using herbicide, and now someone comes along after these pines are 80 years old, and now a new concept for management comes in, a new form of disruption. So we're trying to limit the disruption for reasons you alluded to there. Okay, I'm sorry, you had your hand up earlier. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm wondering, what is the ultimate goal in your opinion? I feel like every 5 years I'm coming to these meetings and pushing for protective status for Mohican. How do we find an ultimate goal that we're seeking here? What, in your opinion, would be what we would want to see happen, I guess?
Yeah, just like we thought we had 20 years ago. We thought that commercial logging was banned and that the huge area of no commercial logging was going to happen, and that they could do their educational logging around the perimeter where they were going to do the least amount of damage. But in this area is actually in one of those zones where is a little bit on the outer, but they never ventured out of their discovery forest area in 20 years. They've just stayed, or no, since 2004. They've stayed there. Now they're just throwing all that out the window. And yet, as you can see, that clear cut costs them almost $100,000. They can't, I mean, you can see why they can't continue that. They wouldn't be able to keep doing their educational cutting because it costs so much. You know, so they have to try to figure out a way to get out of that. But instead of doing it democratically in some way, they just kind of, well, Boyles decided that's the way it's going to be. And he's just, I don't know, I actually went to the forest office yesterday. I was going to talk to Chad about some things I found, how I found these higher figures on what it cost, and some of the management they were going to be, they planned to do in that 2004. Oh, they were going to set up recordings every year, and they were going to set up cameras, and they were going to have amphibian testing. They never did any of that. so I was gonna go ask him about some of that. I go to pull in the forest office, and there's like 8 or 9 huge forest trucks. They had the entire state top brass and forestry at the forest office. But I hadn't made an appointment. And I looked at all those trucks and all those guys standing there, and I'm like, ooh, I just turned around and went the other way. I wasn't gonna, I didn't realize that they were gonna meet with the press and have this big powwow yesterday. None of us were told about it. They all knew when we had our tour, they sent Division of Forestry to hang on every second of whatever we said. And they were nice about it. They didn't try to make arguments or anything. But the thing is, they certainly didn't tell any of us about the tour they were having yesterday with all their top brass that we are paying for them to drive from all over the state and spend this whole day to come up with the press that's in all the papers today. Can you imagine add up all those guys? We're paying their paychecks. They're paid to make their decisions and have their opinions. We're not paid, to do this out of our love for the forest.
Teresa?
Another thing, I like your point about this being the ODNR's position, because obviously they wanted this in the press before this meeting, so, they have their statements here, we can take as that. But it says here that comparing to the other state forests, that compares to 2% in the other state's other forest. And so they say here our forests are really out of balance for what it should be. So,
well, that's the perfect thing of you bringing up this historical information. Bob Boyle doesn't have a clue what happened here in 1909 when the first guys came in to study the white pines. He doesn't have a clue that in the early Ohio books about Ohio trees, that they marvel at the white pines of Mohican Forest. They had no idea about them regenerating on their own. You go 10 miles away to Richland County, and you let the field go, you're not going to get a field of white pine. You're going to get it, now you're going to get invasives, but in the old days you would have gotten hardwoods. But not in Mohican. Mohican loves white pines, but they're not aware of that historical information.
and so back to what he had just asked, so is that forest right there, is that out of balance?
Randy, would you speak to that?
I would just say that it just depends on who's looking at that forest. If you've got a dollar bill on your mind, then yeah, sure, let's take out those big white pines. If you go in there as an ecologist and look at all the ecosystems that are going on in the soil and the canopy, along the trunk, everywhere, no. I mean, Mother Nature takes care of herself. If a tree is diseased, it falls over, it becomes, nutrients for the soil. I mean, that's the beauty of letting things go their own way. They have a way of reaching a balance or an equilibrium. It's when man goes in and tinkers is when we get all the problems, hence all the invasive species we've got now. I mean, we invited multifloral roses, hedgerows, and now look at it, it's everywhere. It's a pain in the butt, no matter where you go, you run into it. So no, we like to think we're the most intelligent species on the planet, but seeing some of the destruction that's happened and the aftermath of logging in many different areas, and I've been to clear cuts in several states, and I've never seen one that's ever, in peer-reviewed articles, they never come back as the same forest that they were previously. They don't regenerate the same. There's just too many things that have changed, and now we're dealing with climate change, and differences in precipitation, and just invasive species that are going to flourish in that little bit of heat that we're going to get from that down the road.
Okay, now, here's a person with a question here, so go ahead, Bill.
I need clarification, I think, and then I'll pose the question. Because before I leave tonight, I'd like to know what I can do, and to know that, the answer to that, number one, and then we had a little online discussion a few weeks back, I have to remember that human beings are the invasive species. We're the ones that have ruined this. And if I recall a short documentary called The Long View that was done by a local historian, Tim McKee, about the Mohican Forest, that all of that land was forested except for an area called the Clear Fork Gorge because it was so steep and difficult. And that is the only native forest left in the Mohican area, is that correct?
Yeah, the steep
No.
gorges, go ahead. No, no.
It, that's where the old growth is or what they haven't cut. But every farm had its wood lot. You know, the farms were a lot larger than they are now. You know, they were hundreds of acres. But every farm had its wood lot, 40 acres, 60 acres. So those, a lot of those areas has the older growth trees. Consequently, that 2,000 acre, or the 10 acre 2004 clear cut, they claimed that was all replanted, or that none of that had been. That was somebody's back 40 that he might have had his cows and pigs in to graze acorns or whatnot. But that was a woodlot of somebody's farm. So there were lots of pockets just like that. And there are still lots of areas where you're gonna find trees that were, you know, if they weren't total virgin forests, they were at least 200 years old, pre-settlement, you know, when the pioneers were here. It wasn't like it was all denuded.
And how many acres are we talking about? Total acreage of the forest versus how many of those pockets? Do we know that?
Well, all that area that's in the gorge is in the park. That's not forest land. That's
Right.
always confusing to everyone. Everybody always thought the whole thing was a park. But the park area is only about 1,200 acres.
1,200 acres
In
for
the
the park.
center,
Yeah.
along the river. Everything else, you know, looking about the forest, all the rest is forestry land.
Yeah, I'm asking about the forestry.
Okay.
How much of that
Is all-
are those pockets, you know, total acreage versus those pockets that you're talking about that the farmers left behind? How much native forest do we think might be there?
Well, they actually planted hardwoods too, so, and they did that back in the 30s and 40s. So some of those areas, they're so mature now, they look, you know, or also regeneration. Things were regenerated when a farmland went, you know, maybe they cleared the land just to have, but they didn't actually get around to having cultivation on all of it, and that probably quickly was regenerated and went back to the hardwoods. It is hard to say exactly, you know, without having some kind of maps really full time.
You can't even, 10%, 20%, 50%?
You can look at the aerial shots from the 30s and get an idea of how much, you know, how much shows up as forest land from early aerial shots. I don't know the exact percentage.
And my point being that I kind of agree with the gentleman back here. There are areas in the forest that are so heavily ruined by these closely planted pine trees. It's not natural in any way, shape, or form. And it would seem like a good, whether it's stewardship or a management plan would, because this is probably not natural forest here. This
No,
is a
it was-
man-made.
That's an odd question to say it's man-made or not, because those pines were planted and they probably sprayed herbicide to suppress the growth of some of those hardwoods at a certain time. But they still survived. Count second growth, I mean, there's very little old growth, true old growth left. Like the gentleman who said, like, what's the least amount of land besides water or wetland? As early, you're saying early.
What's the
succession?
rarest habitat type
What is
other than
the
wetland?
least there is in Ohio is old growth, the little tiny pockets of natural areas and bird, you know, Dysart Woods.
Yeah.
Clear Fork Gorge Nature Preserve, Johnson Woods. You know, there's little pockets here and there. They're very, very rare, but there is little pockets in Mohican of that.
So it would seem that we would, again, I'm not sure what action, you know, stop all logging, that's probably not gonna happen. But to save something like this, I think is important, even though this is not what I would call, you know, old growth forest. But this is a well-managed and a success story, isn't it? The picture we're looking at here? Isn't this what we would
Yeah.
desire throughout the forest?
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Rather than a
It's
clear
like-
cut, and rather than these stands of pines that are dying out anyways because they're so closely planted and nothing else can grow there. Is that a fair assessment or no?
No, I think it's, you know, if we got into all the specifics of management versus letting something go, it gets into a very complicated question. And then also, some of these barren-looking pine plantations where there is relatively little visible undergrowth, well, we want to know, are those the areas that were sprayed repeatedly with herbicide to suppress hardwood competition, see? So identifying the degree of disturbance that causes a pine plantation, some of them to look barren compared to that one, which clearly doesn't look barren. I guess we would get into the specifics of management versus non-management. You almost have to go acre by acre before we could address that, I feel.
So my actual question is, your position would be leave it all alone. Leave it all alone and naturalize and just, it's such a small chunk of land, actually. You know, I spent time in 1 million acres in West Virginia in the Monongahela. He was talking about 4 million acres. And, you know, this is such a small chunk of land, it seems like we're arguing over, you know, who gets the crumbs.
Yes.
So your position would be leave it alone and let it naturally develop?
That might be Eric's position. It's actually not my position, because I'd like to see things buried on a little bit, where it would look like that. But because of the invasives now, that's really, really hard. When they did that cutting and thinned that out, they didn't have those problems then. So it's be very difficult to do. One thing that would help on those pines is, instead of trying to take big equipment in and take them out, they could lay them on the ground with some guy with a chainsaw, you know, just lay them on the ground and let them just start to rot to add the nutrition to the soil, you know, and then that would break it up a little bit. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how to do it.
Isn't there's a value to these trees they want to take out? That has to be part of the equation.
That's why they're doing it.
That's why they're probably to start with.
I was going to say, when I was in Minnesota, up in the Boundary Waters, which is a very beautiful forested area, I was reading you know, like an introduction, well, I think it was an article about somebody who was like a long-time resident who was Native American or something. They were saying in the beginning of the article, all the white pines are gone, or the white pines are gone now, they're not coming back. And then it went into her story. And I was like, the white pines are gone, why are the white pines gone? And it, you know, that's just kind of been on my mind since they talked about, you know, taking out these white pines, which are like my favorite tree. and I'm thinking, why did the white pines disappear there? And now I'm wondering if it was because they were selectively cut down because they were a used tree. Is that correct?
I know that's the case, like in Michigan, which was covered with white pines, or some areas in Maine. They don't really want to regenerate. It's just a freaky thing that in Mohican, that's what wants to come in. I mean, you clear an area right now, and if it doesn't come in with invasives, there's little baby white pines everywhere. I just love it here.
It's something about the soil,
Yeah.
acidic soil or something.
Mycorrhizal fungi, all of these things are so much more complicated than any of us realize. And just like the grouse issue, we interviewed some real top-notch ecologist experts about getting the concept of getting grouse back in Mohican by cutting some of this too mature forest and getting a new early successional forest. And they were saying the disappearance of grouse throughout much of the state of Ohio is a problem too complicated. There are like 10 different suspected causes, and their conclusion, and these are some top people in the state, their conclusion is we don't really know. We see a huge number of causes that are intersecting, and we don't even know if we have them all. So it's one of those, a lot of these situations, you get into the real nitty-gritty of the question. It gets so complicated, we don't know. Then that takes us really to what Randi would have to say about going in and having a particular management plan, the management plan of the decade, new management plan of the decade. And what do you think about that?
Well, it's, you know, it's like we said, things are changing. The climate's changing in the state. You've got invasive species. it's almost impossible to write any kind of a management plan. I mean, there's just so many, I mean, you'd have to get data from climatologists and, you know, soil specialists, and, I mean, it would be overwhelming to try to write a management plan for a forest. That's why I said Mother Nature will find an equilibrium. It's, you know, I mean, sometimes it's not the equilibrium you want, but, you know, just like this forest, I mean, some of those trees were able to overcome the herbicide and sprout and grow, and some of them weren't, but, you know, eventually it looks like a great forest. I mean, we don't have old growth forest, and if you want to go see old growth forest, like I said, Dysart Woods is down in Belmont County, it's 40 acres, that's it. I mean, that's almost unheard of. But this is almost as good, and it will someday be, you know, a very mature forest that our kids and grandkids and their, you know, ancestors and everybody else down the road hopefully will be able to visit. But it's just such a short-sighted vision to see it as timber and not see what the future could hold for this and how valuable it would be to the residents of the state.
Okay, here I want to address the issue of time now. We said the forum would start at 6, and we did start at 6. We said it would end at 7:30, and then we need a little time to return the room to the library. Now, the panelists are going to be around. We'll stick around and talk, but I am going to end this at 7:30, as we promised. And if there's someone who hasn't asked a question before, I want to go to someone who hasn't asked a question before. There's one.
I have both a comment and a question or a request. My comment is that I think it's unfortunate that we don't have a representative from the division because that's part of the story too. My request is, could you say something about the Conservancy, what the philosophy of the Conservancy is?
Okay. I'll speak to that as a trustee for North Central Ohio Land Conservancy. Our mission is to preserve the natural history of Ohio. And we say we hold our land in trust for that purpose. And I met with the chief of the Division of Wildlife today, and he was talking about how they ODNR holds their land in trust for the state of Ohio. Now, in his case, that's his personal pledge. That's how he feels about his job, and that's what they say. That's how they hold it in trust. But they have the legal right, they reserve the right to timber all of their land. And they assure us they're not going to do that because they hold it in trust.
Is it wildlife or forestry?
Division of Wildlife is among who I talked to today. So I'm just taking that as an example. So they say they hold it in trust, and they say it. Now, we say it, and then we legally disable ourselves from timbering the land. We do that by recording a deed restriction, and we give power to another organization that restrains us, that would prevent us from timbering the land if we choose to. And then both organizations agree in a public document that if either one of us betray our trust, any citizen could take us to court to enforce the deed restriction. So when we say we hold the land in trust, we've done it by setting up checks and balances that are ultimately in the hands of the people to enforce against us if we change our mind. Now that, I think, is the proper use of the word trust. So, you know, the approach, I would say, if you look at Mohican, I'm going to pardon the panel here, but if you look at Mohican as being unique in the northern half of Ohio, which was one of the points that the doctor made here, we're unique in the northern half of Ohio. And if protecting it is really important, then have a system of checks and balances. Have the state record a conservation easement in favor of a county-owned park district and in favor of an independent land trust, and pledge that place is not going to be commercially timbered. Just commit to it, and then let it go to old growth. Now that would be ultimately the way to protect Mohican. And we know it works because it's being done in other areas. Okay? But we're going to stick around to answer questions. I want to see if there's anyone else who hasn't asked one before. And I'm going to go to, okay, Skip, go ahead. Back there. Wait, you know what? Here's someone who hasn't asked one. Go ahead, Mr. Dew.
It sounds like the plan is quite contradictory, with the white pines being the tallest, and I guess they're saying it blocks out the sunlight, so the plants underneath aren't able to grow properly in their eyes. But it also sounds like bringing in the machinery to take these white pines down is going to destroy all of the plants that they're trying to save.
Yeah.
We think it's contradictory.
Yes.
Panel on it?
Yeah,
Exactly. Very much so.
exactly.
And I don't think we've heard from
Has
him.
it
Go ahead.
been predetermined who's going to log this? She had mentioned the Amish, or is it to the
We're under
highest
the
bidder?
impression it is. It's been predetermined. It's down to two, last year, it was down to two different Amish timber
Seriously?
people. Yeah,
Already?
they've already made the agreements.
Go ahead.
Concerning your ad hoc committee, twofold question. Were there ODN representatives on that ad hoc committee?
Yes.
There were?
Yeah, they, even a national forester was on it. And they set up the meetings, they monitored them, there was someone always representing, several people representing ODNR at every meeting.
Is it correct that you met monthly for a period of 3 years to hammer out the plan?
Yes,
The agreement?
yes.
Was the agreement such that all that land was not to be harvested at all, or were there multiple uses for that in your end agreement?
There were multiple uses, there were 3 different zones. The main zone being what they call Zone A, which was about 2,000 acres, which was to be off limits. They could only take trees that were in danger of falling or disease or something, and they'd have to be really careful with not disturbing the soil the best they could. The next zone, they could take single tree selection as long as they kept the canopy intact, which is actually relatively difficult to do, but they agreed to that. But they would be able to go in and single take, they'd be able to do some harvesting, but because they had to do it for education, they didn't really ever touch that area. And then Zone C, which they created a discovery forest, which the clear cut was their very first educational cut. And then they also did some thinning in the pines. That's really all they've done since they started that in 2004. So it wasn't that they couldn't cut it all, they had to cut they did have restrictions and were supposed to be doing their logging to demonstrate to landowners all the different silviculture methods of forestry. But they just happened to start with the big clear cut right off the bat.
So there was give and take by the different interests that were represented on the ad hoc committee.
Yes.
It didn't all go one way or the other.
No.
So
it was
now,
not compromise.
is it correct that some of the agreed areas that were part of the zone that would not be disturbed, now they're saying we want to go into that and start cutting some trees, when in the agreement with the ad hoc committee was that was a non-touchable zone. Is that correct or not?
Yes, you can see on the left over there was the original protected area, and now it's basically flip-flopped to non-protected area, although some of it was still in protected area.
And the area that they got logged went up by 100 acres, right here. They say it's a few acres, that's 100 acres they just added on to their cut zone. And the acreage above the solid pink has decreased by 1,000 some. Those are the only areas protected now that are in the pink. So they say it's not much of a difference, but it's a significant difference.
But it's not really protected, because they can still now at this point do commercial logging, they can go in and do a clear cut if they want, if the chief decides they want to take, whatever, it does not have the protection that we thought it had in the past.
But the ad hoc committee had agreed that that area would not be touched, and now the new 5-year thing says, well, we're going to break the agreement. Is that correct?
Yes, that's very correct.
Okay. So in another 5 years, we could break another part of the non-touch zone. In another 5 years, we could break, et cetera. That could happen.
So these changes are in effect.
No, whoa, whoa, whoa. You know, here's the thing. I did promise we're gonna need to end this now. We're gonna stick around. We can talk one-on-one with folks, but for those of you who are on a schedule, it concludes the public part. You're welcome to mill around here or talk to us individually, but we'll kind of adhere to the schedule here. I thank you all very much for attending, and if you happen to agree with us, we've got these conveniently here for you, and you're welcome to use them and welcome to add to them and add your own comments. Robin, real quick, go ahead.
Add that also there is a handout with the names of the advisory council that was appointed by the governor and bios of those individuals. What's happening next after after the deadline? It goes to that council, if I'm understanding this correctly, it's advisory council, and then they make the final decision to go ahead with this plan.
And there is a meeting of this advisory council going to be held here in Mohican. And the public, I just called the governor's office today. The public is open to attend that. If you look at this piece of paper, it says at the top, who decides Mohican's forest fate. We really think you all need to take these and share them with the public, because these are the people that are going to be deciding the fate of our forest. And by the way, the public out of these 8 has 1 vote. We have 1 person that's appointed by the governor to represent us, and the other 7 are forest industry tied people, and that's what we have in place with our Ohio Revised Code. So we want everybody to be aware of that. Anybody know the date of the meeting?
November 7th.
No, December 7th.
December 7th.
December 7th at 10 o'clock.
Yes, if anybody would like to come hear these 8 people, just
Okay, thank you very much, but we're going to wrap it up now. Thank you.